The doctor had barely left the room. I still had the IV attached to my arm when I noticed he already had the backpack on his back. That dark green backpack I had given him on his last birthday. 32 years old. How time flies. "You just won't understand," he said. He didn't even look me in the eye. He turned his back and left. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot, or a goodbye. I stared at that door for what seemed like an eternity, waiting, as if he would come back, as if it had only been a mistake, as if my son hadn't just abandoned me on a hospital bed without looking back. I did understand. I understood that at that moment I was no longer a priority, not even a mother. I was just a nuisance. A problem to be resolved as quickly as possible so he could get back to his life. A life where, for a long time, I no longer fit. I took a deep breath. The smell of alcohol and medicine filled my lungs. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it stayed there, stuck, as if it were concrete. The tears came without warning. I didn't make an effort to hold them back. There was no one there to see me cry anyway. The window in the room showed a piece of gray sky. It was raining outside. Or maybe it was just the reflection of my tears blurring my vision. I closed my eyes and allowed the memory to take me far from that cold room. I remembered the first time he had a fever. So small, so fragile in my arms. I stayed up for 3 nights, changing compresses, singing softly, praying for every breath that came out of that warm little body. "Mom is here," I used to say. "Mom's not going anywhere." And I didn't. I didn't leave his side for even a minute. I remembered the times he came home in the early morning during his teenage years. I would pretend to be asleep, but I was always alert, waiting to hear the key in the door. And even after the fights, the harsh words exchanged hours before, there was always hot food waiting for him. A note on the fridge, a silent "I love you" in the form of care. And now, it was enough for me to get sick for me to become a burden, to become someone he wanted to leave behind. Maybe I did everything wrong. Maybe I loved too much or too little, or in the wrong way. Is there a manual that no one gave me? Do the other mothers know some secret that I didn't discover in time? The IV was dripping slowly into my vein. Each drop seemed to count a second of loneliness. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The clock on the wall showed 3:30 in the afternoon. The next hours would drag on as if they had lead feet. I kept staring at the white ceiling, the IV dripping, the clock ticking slowly. No messages on the cell phone that lay mute beside the bed. No visitors. Nothing. On the chart at the foot of the bed it was written, "Emergency contact, son." But the danger had already arrived. The emergency was already happening, and he wasn't there. The irony made me smile, a bitter smile that lasted only a second. "Mrs. Maria, how are you feeling?" The nurse entered so silently that I didn't even notice. Young, perhaps the age I was when my son was born. She smiled in a gentle, almost maternal way, which seemed absurd to me. How could someone so young have that look of someone who had already seen so much pain? "I'm fine," I lied. The lie came out automatically, as always. "I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." How many times have I repeated that in my life? Like a mantra, like a prayer, as if saying it would make it true. "Did your son leave?" The question took me by surprise. I thought no one had noticed. I thought my pain was invisible, as it always was. "He had commitments," I replied, protecting him instinctively. Even now, even after everything, a mother's instinct doesn't die, even when it hurts. The nurse adjusted my pillow, checked the IV, jotted something down on the clipboard. Her movements were precise and efficient, but there was a gentleness in them that made my eyes burn again. "If you need anything, just press the button," she said, before leaving behind a light scent of lavender that for an instant covered the hospital smell. And then, silence again. that deafening silence that seems to scream all the truths we try to ignore. I wondered how long it would take for someone to miss me if I simply disappeared. How many days would it take for my son to notice? Weeks, maybe. Or only when he needed something. Borrowed money? Someone to take care of the dog during vacation? A family recipe? The thought was unfair. I knew it. But pain has that way. It makes us unfair, makes us small, reduces us to our most primitive fear. The fear of not mattering to anyone. The afternoon dragged on. The hallway lights flickered occasionally. I heard distant voices, muffled laughter from the medical staff, the metallic sound of instruments being moved, doors opening and closing, life continuing out there, while inside that room time seemed frozen. I tried to sleep, but sleep did not come. Only a kind of stupor, a state between waking and dreaming, where memories mixed with fears and regrets. I saw my little son running on the beach, laughing as the waves licked his feet. I saw my teenage son, furious with me for some reason I can't even remember now. I saw my adult son, distant, increasingly distant, as if I were seeing him through a foggy window, unable to reach him. "You are overprotective," he told me once. "You suffocate," he said on another occasion. "You don't understand how the world works today," he often repeated, as if I were a relic from a time that no longer exists. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really didn't understand. Maybe there was a chasm between us that I didn't know how to cross. Or maybe, just maybe, it was he who didn't understand what it means to love someone more than yourself. What it means to look at a person and see in them your greatest achievement and your greatest fear. What it means to have your heart beating outside your chest, vulnerable to the world, without you being able to protect it. The night arrived silently, covering the room with elongated shadows. The hallway lights were dimmed, creating an even lonelier atmosphere. The hospital seemed to breathe more slowly at night, as if it were saving energy for the next day. It was when the hallway light went out completely that another light lit up inside me. I can't explain it well. It wasn't something I saw with my eyes. It was something I felt, like when you are in a dark room and suddenly realize you are not alone. There is a presence, an inexplicable but real certainty. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt something stronger than any word. Presence. God was there, in the silence, in the room, in my pain. He didn't need to explain. He just stayed. And there I cried like I had never cried before, not as an abandoned mother, but as a found daughter, a remembered daughter, a loved daughter. The crying came differently this time. It wasn't a cry of self-pity or bitterness. It was a cry of relief, of recognition, as if something very old and very deep inside me had finally found a place to rest. All my life I had been the caregiver, the protector, the one who was always available, always strong, always ready to carry the burdens of others. But at that moment, I was the one being carried, the one being cared for, the one being seen. Why can't he love me the way I love him? I asked the silence. I didn't expect an answer, but it came nonetheless. Not in words, but in a certainty that settled gently in my heart. Maybe he does love, in his own way, to the extent he can, with the tools he has. Perhaps the problem wasn't the lack of love, but the expectations I built around that love. Expectations that, without realizing, became chains for him and for me. What if, for a moment, I could see my son not as an extension of myself, but as a completely separate being, with his own fears, dreams, and limitations. The idea was both frightening and liberating at the same time. That night in the hospital became a strange spiritual retreat. Between blood pressure measurements and IV changes, between physical and emotional pains, Something was healing in me that no medication could touch. I fell asleep at some point, a deep and restorative sleep like I hadn't had in years. When I woke up, the first rays of sunlight timidly entered through the window, painting the room a soft golden hue. "Good morning, Mrs. Maria." The same nurse from the previous afternoon came in, bringing breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," I replied, and realized it wasn't a lie. "Your son called," she said, as she adjusted the bed so I could sit up. "He asked how you were." I felt something move inside my chest. It wasn't exactly joy, nor sadness. It was something more complex, more nuanced. "He said he'd come later," the nurse continued. "He apologized for yesterday." I nodded, not knowing what to say. What was I expecting to feel? Validation? Triumph? See, he cares? But what I felt was just a calm acceptance. Whatever the reason for the call, guilt, obligation, or perhaps, yes, love, it did not change what I had discovered that night. After the nurse left, I picked up my phone. There was a message from him, sent at 4:23 a.m. "Mom, sorry about yesterday. I was stressed with work and I took it out on you. It's no excuse, I know. I'll visit you this afternoon. Do you need anything?" I read and reread the message several times. In other times, I would have clung to these words as a lifeline. I would have analyzed every comma, looking for signs of the love I so desperately needed to confirm. I would have responded immediately, saying that it was all right, that I understood, that he shouldn't worry, but something had changed. I no longer desperately needed his validation to feel complete, to feel loved. I simply replied, "It's okay. I don't need anything. Thank you. See you later." I put the phone aside and looked out the window. The day was clear, without clouds. Outside, life continued its indifferent course to the small epiphanies that occurred inside hospital rooms. I understood that being a mother does not mean being a martyr, and that God does not require me to endure everything in silence, pretending a strength I do not always have. In that hospital, I was not forgotten. I was visited by someone who had never left my side, and that presence gave me the courage to begin to redraw the contours of my relationship with my son, not with hurt or resentment, but with a new understanding that true love also means freedom. Freedom for him to be who he is, with his flaws and limitations. Freedom for me to be who I am, with my needs and vulnerabilities. The doctor came to visit me shortly after. She brought heartening news. I could be discharged the next day if everything continued to go well. "Do you have anyone to help you at home for the first few days?" she asked. The question hung in the air for a moment. Before, I would have hesitated, torn between the truth and pride. I would have said yes, of course. My son would be there, even though I knew he probably wouldn't be. "I have a neighbor who offered to stay with me," I replied. It was true. Mrs. Conchesson, a widow like me, had insisted on helping me when she learned about the surgery. At the time, I refused, saying that my son would take care of everything. Now, I realized how foolish I had been not to accept that helping hand. "I'll call her later," I added. The doctor smiled, satisfied, and continued explaining the care I should take at home, the medications, the restrictions. I listened attentively, taking mental notes, taking responsibility for my own well-being. It was strange, this new feeling, as if I were finding myself again after years of losing myself in the role of a mother, as if at 64 years old, I were rediscovering who Maria was before being Enrique's mother. The afternoon arrived, and with it, the anxiety about meeting my son. What would I say? How would I act? The resentment was still there, I couldn't deny it. The hurt from the way he had left the previous day, the harsh words, the abandonment. But there was also a new perspective, a genuine desire to build something different. At 4:17, the wall clock marked each minute with ruthless precision. I heard knocks on the door. "Come in," I said, reflexively fixing my hair, as if appearance mattered at that moment. Henrique entered carrying a bouquet of flowers. Daisies, my favorites. His face was marked by an expression I knew well, guilt mixed with discomfort. "Hi, Mom," he said, approaching slowly as if testing the waters. "Hi, son." We remained silent for a moment, a silence full of unspoken words, years of broken communication, and frustrated expectations on both sides. "I brought your favorite flowers," he finally said, placing the bouquet on the small table. "Thank you. They're beautiful." More silence. He sat on the chair beside the bed, restless, looking at everything except me. "How are you feeling?" he asked, finally meeting my eyes. "Physically better. The surgery was successful." He nodded, genuinely relieved. "That's good. And emotionally?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing we usually discussed. Our conversations generally revolved around safe, neutral topics. The weather, the news, his job. Never our feelings, never our wounds. "Honestly, hurt," I responded, and the word came out lighter than I expected. There was no accusation in it, just an acknowledgement. He lowered his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry about yesterday. I wasn't at my best. I can understand that. We all have bad days. It's not just that," he continued, surprising me again. "It's just that seeing you like this, in the hospital, scared me a lot, and I don't know how to deal with that. With the idea that you could, die?" I completed for him. He visibly shuddered. "Yeah, that." And then I understood. His fear wasn't that different from mine. He also feared loss, abandonment. He also didn't know how to process the idea that the people we love won't be here forever. "Henrique," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I'm afraid too. Every day. Afraid of losing you, of not being important to you, of being alone. And that fear sometimes makes me act in ways that push you away, instead of bringing you closer." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Surprise? Recognition? Maybe both. "But yesterday something happened to me," I continued. "I realized that I can't live like this anymore. I can't let my fear define our relationship." "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about freedom, yours and mine. Freedom to be who we are, without the burden of impossible expectations. You don't need to be the perfect son who's always present, always available. And I don't need to be the perfect mother who never complains, never needs help, never shows weakness." He was silent, absorbing my words. I could see in his face the effort to comprehend this new version of me, this mother who spoke of boundaries and freedom instead of sacrifice and duty. "What happened last night?" he finally asked. How to explain, how to put into words an experience that transcended language. "Let's just say I had an unexpected visitor," I replied with a small smile. "Someone who reminded me that before being your mother, I am a person, with needs, with limitations, with the right to my own journey." I don't know if he completely understood what I meant. Maybe one day I would tell him about that night, about the presence I felt, about how I felt loved and seen in a way I had never experienced before. But not now. Now was the time to rebuild, brick by brick, the bridge between us. "I'm being discharged tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Conceição is going to stay with me for a few days." "But I can take care of you," he protested, exactly as I knew he would. "I know you can, but you don't need to. Not this time." He seemed confused, maybe even a little hurt. "You don't want me to help?" "It's not that. It's that you have your life, your work, your responsibilities. And I need to learn to ask for help from other people too. Not just you. But you are my mother. And I always will be. But I am also Maria, a friend of Conceição, former colleague of Aparecida, neighbor of Mr. João. I have a network that, out of fear or pride, I have never fully activated. Enrique looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he really was. You've changed, he finally said. Maybe. Or maybe I just remembered who I really am. We talked for some more time. It wasn't the deepest or most revealing conversation in the world, but it was honest, real, without the layers of pretense and expectations that usually covered our interactions. When he got up to leave, I didn't feel the usual panic, the fear of being alone, the urge to ask him to stay a little longer. I'll see you tomorrow at the discharge, he said, leaning in to kiss me on the forehead. I can at least take you home, right? I smiled. Of course. I'd be happy with that. After he left, I kept looking at the daisies he had brought. So simple, so perfect in their simplicity. Like the truth I had discovered that lonely night in the hospital. That true love doesn't bind, it doesn't suffocate, it doesn't demand. True love frees. And maybe you need to hear this today. God still visits hospital rooms, empty hearts, mothers who have no one to defend them, and he calls you by your name. Not by your role, not by your functions, not by your titles, by your name. I am Maria. I am a mother, yes, but I am so much more than that, and that is okay. I left the hospital the next day, not just as a woman cured of a physical illness, but as someone who had begun a much deeper healing process, the healing of decades of unspoken expectations, of fears not confronted, of boundaries not set. The path would not be easy, I knew that. Old habits don't die overnight. There would still be days when I would feel abandoned, days when the loneliness would weigh more, days when I would question whether I was doing the right thing by setting these new boundaries. But now I had a new certainty. I was not alone on this journey. I never was. And this certainty made all the difference. As Henrique's car drove away from the hospital, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. A peace that came not from the perfection of circumstances, but from accepting reality as it is. Imperfect, challenging, sometimes painful, but also surprisingly beautiful in its authenticity. The sun was shining outside, warming my face through the car window. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the light bathe me. It was a new day, a new beginning, and I was ready for it. In the following days, I noticed subtle changes in my relationship with Henrique. He called more often, but the conversations were different, less loaded with expectation, lighter. Sometimes we talked for just a few minutes, just to know how the other was doing. And that was all right. Mrs. Conceição proved to be a surprisingly pleasant company. At 72 years old, she had an energy that made mine seem modest. She cooked, told stories of her youth in Portugal, and made me laugh with her direct comments about life. "You know what your problem is, mothers?" she said to me one afternoon as we sipped tea on the porch. "You think your children are extensions of yourselves, that they should think like you, feel like you, live the way you wish to live. But they are different people. They always have been." The simplicity of her observation hit me like a revelation. How many times had I judged Henrique's choices, not because they were wrong in themselves, but because they were not the ones I would have made? How many times had I felt personally rejected when he was simply following his own path? "How did you become so wise, Conceição?" I asked, half joking, half serious. She shrugged, sipping her tea. "By making a lot of mistakes, by suffering a lot, and by learning to let go. I had no choice. You know, my daughter moved to the other side of the world. Either I learned to love her from a distance, or I lost what we had." That conversation stayed with me for days. echoing in my mind as I slowly resumed my routine. The difference was that now I was more aware of my choices, my thoughts, my patterns. I started making small changes, simple but significant things. I stopped calling Henrique every day like I used to. Instead, I waited for him to call when he wanted to talk. Sometimes we went days without contact, and I had to learn not to interpret that as abandonment or lack of love. I began reconnecting with old friends, women who, like me, had dedicated much of their lives to their families and were now rediscovering who they were. We went to the movies together, to exhibitions, to cafes. We talked about books, politics, and old dreams we had set aside. I went back to painting, a passion I had abandoned when Henrique was born. My first attempts were disastrous. Trembling hands, wrong colors, distorted proportions. But there was a joy in the simple act of creating, a freedom I had forgotten. 3 months after the surgery, Enrique invited me to dinner at his place. It was the first time he had invited me in over a year. Before, I would simply show up, with homemade food and too many questions, ignoring the signs that he might need space. When I arrived, I noticed small changes in his apartment. New plants, a different bookshelf, paintings that weren't there before. I realized, with a start, how much time had passed since I last really observed his space, his world. "You redecorated," I commented as he poured me a glass of wine. "About 6 months ago," he replied with a crooked smile. 6 months. And I hadn't noticed. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. He had cooked, something simple, pasta with tomato sauce, but made with care. We talked about his job, my new hobbies, movies we had recently watched. And then, in the middle of a pause in the conversation, he said something that caught me completely off guard. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I felt my eyes fill with tears. "Why?" I managed to ask. "For living your life, truly living, not just existing because of me." I didn't know what to say. So I just smiled, and he smiled back, and in that smile, there was a mutual understanding that words could not express. That night, returning home by taxi, I realized a truth as simple as it was profound. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love we can give someone is to free them from the responsibility of being our only source of happiness. A few weeks later, I received a phone call that would change everything again. The doctor's voice was serious, professional, but there was a note of genuine compassion when he said the words no one wants to hear. "The tests showed something we need to investigate further." Another hospital. More tests, more waiting. The word cancer hanging in the air like a ghost, unspoken but present in every worried glance, in every careful question. This time was different. When I told Enrique, he didn't run away. He didn't say that I wouldn't understand. Instead, he sat next to me, took my hand and asked, "How can I help?" 3 simple words, but so powerful. So different from the "I'll take care of everything" I would have expected before, or the distant silence I feared. "Being present," I replied. "Not all the time, not sacrificing your life, just present, in your own way." And he was. Not perfect, not infallible, but present. Sometimes physically, taking me to appointments or spending a night at home when I was especially weak after chemotherapy. Sometimes emotionally, through messages, calls, little gestures that said, "I'm thinking of you." The diagnosis was difficult. The treatment, brutal. There were days when I doubted I could go on, days when the physical pain seemed unbearable, days when fear consumed me like a raging fire. But I never felt abandoned again. Not by Enrique, not by my friends, not by that mysterious and comforting presence I had found that night in the hospital. I learned that there are different kinds of presence. There is the physical presence, of course, the comfort of a hug, a hand holding yours while you vomit after chemo, someone to change your bed linens when you don't have the strength. But there is also the emotional presence, knowing that someone is thinking of you, praying for you, rooting for you, even from a distance. And there is the spiritual presence, the one I felt that night and continued to feel in the darkest moments, the certainty that even when we are alone, we are not truly alone, that there is something greater than us, embracing our pain, sustaining our hope, guiding our steps even when the path seems impossible. A year has passed since that first diagnosis, a year of ups and downs, victories and defeats, good days and impossible days. My hair fell out and started to grow again, differently, grayer, thinner, but mine. My body has changed, marked by visible and invisible scars. My energy is no longer the same, but something inside me is stronger, clearer, truer. Yesterday, Enrique brought me a surprise, a new easel, professional paints, quality brushes, for when you're ready to start painting again, he said. And today, as I watch the sunrise from my bedroom window, I feel an almost physical urgency to put this light on the canvas, to capture this moment of pure beauty and transform it into something that can be shared. I don't know how much more time I have left. No one really knows. But I've learned that the quality of life is not measured in years, but in moments of true connection, with oneself, with others, with the divine. My son taught me this, ironically, at the moment when he seemed to be leaving me. His departure from that hospital room made space for a greater truth to enter, a truth that was there all along, waiting for me to be ready to see it. Sometimes we need to feel completely alone to discover that we've never really been alone. I know there will be other difficult moments ahead, other challenges, other losses, other pains. Life doesn't offer guarantees, and human love, no matter how deep it is, will always have its limitations, its flaws, its blind spots. But now I know I can face whatever comes. Not because I am strong. There are days when I still feel terribly fragile, but because I finally understood that my strength does not come from myself. It comes from this presence that found me in the darkness, that called me by my name when I had forgotten who I was. That reminded me that before any other role or title, I am loved, unconditionally, eternally, exactly as I am. And perhaps that is what we all need to remember from time to time, that our value is not in what we do, how much we are needed, how much we are loved by others. Our value lies simply in our existence, in being who we are, with all our contradictions and complexities. My name is Maria. I am a mother, a friend, an artist, a cancer patient, a survivor, so many things. But above all, I am myself. And finally, after 65 years, I am learning to live in this truth. If this moved you, the next video will move you even more. Click here and stay with me.